You're listening to Cards to the Moon, a podcast about trading cards from both a collector and investor perspective. We hope you'll stick around for the ride as we take a deep dive into the state of the hobby, share some hot takes, hopefully some useful advice, and fun stories along the way. Hey guys, welcome to the Cards to the Moon podcast, and we are recording episode number 37. Hosting today's episode is myself, Clark, from 5 Card Guys on Instagram, and as always, I have Hyung from Integrity Sports Cards and John from Trade You at Recess with me. So normally at the end of each episode, we always ask for your questions for future episodes, and we got a few over the past couple weeks. So I thought in today's episode, off the top, we can answer some of those questions and feedback we've received. All right. We actually addressed one feedback already from Chris about doing more hockey on the show. So if you missed last week's episode, we introduced a new segment called Hockey Highlights, where John gave a couple of great top 5 lists of both modern and vintage hockey cards to invest in or just to collect. So you can listen to last week's episode for your hockey card fix. Another comment we got was about a couple of times we talked about FCG grading, which is forensic card grading, and how it seemed we were touting them as a great grading company without much reason why, other than using them to help determine whether it's worth sending over to PSA with all the subgrades that FCG offers. Hyung, I'm going to let you address this first, since you're really the only one from this group, at least to date, to have used their services. So
yeah, and I only talk about this because it's a service that I needed, right? So you gotta always remember, I need subgrades that are affordable, because some of the raw cards just don't justify kind of like the premiums that PSA or BGS has, right? So for me, I guess a lot of people ask, I was blown away by their service. That's one thing as a customer, just straight up unbiased. I owned 0 FCG slabs before. Obviously I did my due diligence on it, and it just made sense for me as a customer. So, just like SGC did as well, right? So I know there's a lot of discussion regarding card value, will it hold value? But I think that's something we see over time. And to be honest, it's the people that are part of the hobby essentially are going to be the ones buying, FCG graded cards, right? So the market will be dictated on how people respond to FCG as a whole, as a company, right? So for me as a customer, I just view it a service that was needed at that price point, right? And that's why I was happy as a customer. I got exactly what I needed. In terms of value, I won't know. But I do know that, for instance, I graded a Bobby Witt Jr. auto, a refractor auto, and a PSA 9 at the time was probably selling for $1,500. To me, my FCG 9 was probably a PSA 9, I'd say, if I went PSA. But for me, I wouldn't sell it under $1,500 anyways. I'm holding that until, the market tells me to sell. And when it reaches that, $2,000, $2,100 mark, that would be a comp, right? So for me, as time progresses, and the main thing is, what I see is they're attacking the Bowman Chrome market, the first Chrome market. And to me, I feel like that's a smart strategy, just because it's niche. It's over time. There's some valuable cards like the Bobby Witt Juniors that are finding themselves at record-breaking sales, and they happen to be in an FCG slab, right? Not saying that it has happened, but I've seen colored Bobby Witt Juniors. So time will tell, but at that price point, I don't see it struggling, honestly, in terms of the ROI, because we buy the card, not the grade, first of all, right? So for me, it's as that Bobby Witt Jr., goes up in value, it's the card that goes up in value, not really the grade. It's just justifying what you're willing to spend on that particular card. And if FCG is grading based on a very fair assessment in terms of you're getting the grade what it actually deserves, then they might have a lot of value to people that are looking for kind of the same service, right? Which is cheap subgrades, right? And in the Bowman Chrome market, that's something that's needed. So yeah, long story short, we're not getting paid for FCG. Definitely not. Or any company for that matter, right? So,
Right.
yeah, I just wanted to clear that up. But yeah, I was very happy with the service. I was very happy with SGC too, right? So for me, it's like as a customer, I'm gonna probably send a lot more cards to SGC and FCG moving forward. That's just the way the market is dictating right now, right? It's nothing more or less than the fact that a service is needed. It has nothing to do with how much are my cards are going to be worth, because if I made the investments in the right cards, then I don't really, try to play the game on just solely graded. Like the grade is what dictates the value, right? I'm looking at it from more of the card dictates the value from a long-term perspective.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think in this new age of grading, everybody's been used to submitting to PSA or BGS or whatever, kind of rolling the dice on the PSA 10. If you get it, you 3x, you 5x, you 10x your money or whatever. And that's kind of been everybody's thought process in how grading works. But I think the point about FCG is not that, number one, it's like an amazing company, and we're not trying to necessarily pump their tires. But if there's a company, and they've shared, if you go onto their website or their Facebook group, they share exactly how they do the grading. They use like those professional machines like that use like a microscope to look at all the edges and the trims and the corners. So if they end up giving like a gem mint grade for $30, that gives you the confidence to either maybe sell it, and somebody that appreciates FCG will give you value on that. Maybe not, but at the minimum, somebody like Hyung can take that card and be like, you know what, in the future, if this guy blows up and I'm still holding on to this prospect, I can now have a little more confidence to send it to PSA. And I think this is going to become a PSA 10, right? So, and another part of this is when you look at all of the new pricing that's coming out, like I think in this new world, you shouldn't be afraid to kind of invest a little bit of money into your cards, right? Like with FGG, just to find the grades and have it slabbed, have it protected, and then people seeing it can see the grades for $30. That's not bad. You invest a little bit of money into it. Let's say, actually a really good option is SGC's new 5-day express for $50. Let's say in 2 weeks, I'm going to go to like a sports card show in Toronto, and I'm holding on to a 54 Topps Gordie Howe. Raw. I had it, like my grandfather had it sitting in the basement. There's nothing wrong, that you can imagine the consumer confidence in knowing that this is an authentic card. I'm going to send it to SGC for $50 on 5-day express, and I'm going to get it authenticated, not even graded, just straight authenticated slab for $50. And then I walk into that sports car show and I have an authenticated 54 Gordie Howe. Like, it's not necessarily about the ROI or the 2x or the 3x, but sometimes it's, you invest a little bit of money to give other people or whoever you're trading with or whoever you're selling with a little bit more confidence to bid on your card or to buy your card, right? Because a lot of people are going to be hesitant, like especially this whole raw world, everybody is hesitant to buy. You're looking at pictures, you're not looking at it in person. If you can give somebody a little bit more confidence for $30, for $25, I mean,
yeah,
to each his own, right?
And raw card reviews at Beckett right now, I think they're at $40, right? And that doesn't include subgrades. So for me, it's like, find me a grading company that's going to tell me my grades on the 4, areas that grading companies look at. That's what I want, period. And I want them protected and slabbed. And I paid $24 for 50 and over, right, with FCG, and $30 with SGC, and I was very, very happy. And that's all I'm sharing. It has nothing to do with anything else, and I was just a pleased customer. And you know what? I will be using them again, both companies, because I find value in building my collection as well.
Right. Yeah. Right.
No, that's great that we got the comments so we can clarify where we're coming from. For me, we all don't agree 100% on each grading company or the value that we put on each grading company, which is fine. That's we're just respecting everyone's opinion. But for me, I look at the macro, like what I like about FCG and any grading company, to be frank, that's coming into the game is this increased competition can only be better for collectors, for hobbyists.
Absolutely.
Because, in theory, if one grading company, a new grading company, does a great job and takes some of that market share, I would hope that will put pressure on PSA and BGS and even SGC now to do a better job in providing good service for their customers. So I look at it more from a macro lens. I don't have any cards submitted to FCG personally, but I'm looking on the sidelines to see how their market share grows. And if there's always a point where I'm going to jump in, like I did with SGC. Like I was just kind of watching them, and before SGC, I was more exclusively buying PSA and BGS like a lot of collectors. Right. But then when the PSA and BGS suspended their services, now what? And you look for alternatives that are good to go with, and you see a lot more people are slabbing their cards with SGC. That gave me confidence that there's a market for SGC cards, and why can't that happen to other grading cards companies like FCG? And I think the more options we have as collectors, the better, because ultimately when we want to get into that flip game, or even for the investor types, to have a company that can offer a service, a reliable, good service for cheap and quickly is that's what's missing right now. When it was missing when PSA and BGS suspended their services, and now we have options, which is great. So that's what I like to see as a collector. And the more grading companies that get, and not all of them are going to survive. Obviously, there's so many out there that we haven't even mentioned on the show, but we need more than just 2 or 3, I think. And let the collectors decide where they want to go.
Mm-hmm. Now the most important question is, why does every grading company use a 3-letter acronym?
It's just a standard.
Is there some sort of rule that I don't know that you have to name your company?
It's psychology.
It's so funny.
You know what? Well, look at BCCG. It's not great.
Yeah, just one extra letter. I don't know.
It's not great.
I just want to see somebody come out and just call their company Supercards or something, like, instead of...
Well, we'll see if that ever happens. I'm not betting on it. But all right, we actually have one more question that we can address on this episode, and this one's from Brian, who messaged us on Instagram, and he says he's not a big baseball card collector, but he would love to buy a Vladdy card in the $200 to $400 range to hold on to going into this coming season. Hopefully that there is a season. And he did reply back. We don't have to stick strictly to the $400 max limit, because that might limit the options. So let's just say anything under $1,000. Is there any Vladdy card that you would recommend to Brian to hold on to as an investment over this coming season?
I'm actually sticking to under 500, because that's kind of, I feel like that's more realistic. And there's a lot of opportunity, I think, floating in that range, especially that 200 and 400. Sure. And that's the thing. It's I think there's a lot of cards of Vladdies that are still cheap, that are still underpriced. One specifically, his 2016 First Chrome Refractor, PSA 9. I think in the last couple months they sold between $400 to $500, and that's a numbered refractor of his First Chrome. It's obviously non-autoed, but nice. I'd imagine a PSA 10 is probably going north of $2.5K. So for me, at that $400, $500 for a PSA 9, I think there's a big discrepancy in terms of a PSA 9 and a PSA 10 price. I don't think there's that big of a difference, or should be. I also think there's a lot of opportunity, with your X-Fractors, your PSA 9s, X-Fractors that are floating around $250, $300. I think those can easily grow, especially because everything's like the staple is based off the PSA 10 price, right? So, and then you go into pop counts and see, hey, you know what? The PSA 9 of an X-Fractor shouldn't be that big of a difference. That's the way I see it when it's, less than, 20% of the PSA 10 value, you might find a lot of value in that PSA 9 is what I'm saying, right? Especially for a card that's probably very similar in terms of grade overall, right? So, and lastly, I'll throw this out there. I do think kind of like the Topps update, I know it's not the desired image, but Vladdy doesn't really have paper parallels, right? So I think there's a small market for Topps update, even though it's very cheap. So you could get a Topps update, a gold, I think for like $300, a BGS 9.5. which is the paper gold, which we all know, obviously Trout's update has a paper gold. And then you look, your Tatis, your Sotos, all those golds do well in the long run in terms of the paper. And there's also in the update, there's a SP and an SSP. I know the SP updates, PSA 9s you could grab for about $200-300, which is dirt cheap. And as well as the SSP where he's holding the baseball, it's a horizontal card. Raws are selling for $475, $500, right? So there's a lot of options, I think, that is in play, I guess. But again, it's there, because in 2019 I find they started printing a lot in terms of the higher prospects, like your Vladdy, Tatis, your Acuñas. They have a boatload of rookie cards, so I always say, you know what, the first to go up will be your Topps Chrome, your flagship, your NNO, your Topps Chrome, and then all these alternatives kind of follow, like the Bowman Chromes, the Topps updates, the Sterlings, and whatnot, right? So yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. I think there's a lot more opportunity to grow with even these, cheaper slabs. I think there's so much value in them. If you could get any numbered, Vladdy at this point, for under $500, I think it's a great steal.
I like when prices are this low, especially when you talk about flagship like Topps Chrome. When prices are low and you look at the refractors that are not numbered, the prices are usually pretty tight together. But as the player becomes a superstar and his prices start to shoot, you're going to start to see some big time separation between pink refractor, Prizm refractor, X factor. So right now, I think Vladdy's cards are tight enough that there's a lot of value here. So if you look at, I'm going to go above the 400 range, but if I think it would be good to spend a little bit extra and be a little bit more protected in terms of print run and pop reports. So for example, pink refractor is at 400 for PSA 10. A regular refractor is at 450. A Prizm refractor is around 500. And then I would argue, I think the good buy is stretching just a little bit above that. And around 550, 575, you get the X factor, right? And if you look at for example, if you look at even Tatis, who's just a little bit ahead of Vladdy, his pinks are 450, 500, but then his X factor is 1,000, 1,100, So I think when Vladdy, if we're all kind of predicting Vladdy's going to have another big year, I think a card like the X factor PSA 10, not only is it liquid because it's a Topps Chrome flagship, it's also liquid because it's a PSA 10. Those are the two greatest, characteristics of liquidity when you want to try to get rid of a card. And I think the X Factor is a great buy at 575 or whatever it is at right now. It has a really good chance of 2xing or 3xing by beginning of the season, by the end of next season, who knows? But something like that, even something for me, the Vladdy Topps Chrome Sapphire PSA 9, which goes for around 550 if you wanted to stretch your money. Again, it's a PSA 9, it's not the 10. But again, you're protected by print run, right? I don't know. In 2019, how many Sapphire sets were there printed? Less than 500. So I for me, I like those two cards.
Yeah, a lot of great suggestions. I don't have much to add because Hyung mentioned about 7 or 8. No, it's just good for Brian. He has choices, right? But for me, I think when I saw this question, with Vladdy being the stud that he is, and we're all bullish on Vladdy's upcoming season, I'm looking at the PSA 9s of numbered cards as a good play. And you guys kind of already addressed that, because if he repeats the season, those cards are going to go up, and the scarcity is already built in because it's numbered. Or if you can find a cheap auto, I know right now, I just kind of looking quickly, and his autograph cards are a little bit more expensive. But if you could wait deeper into the off season, I'm looking at Card Ladder, and surprisingly, his Topps Chrome base rookie auto is not as expensive as you might think, compared to the Bowman Chrome. So that's I think the last one, and this is sold in September, October, so it's been a few months, so that might have changed. But the last one of a PSA 10 sold for $750.
Wow,
Topps
that's
Chrome.
cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
really
then
cheap.
And in September, the one before that was about 600. So, it kind of ebbs and flows in terms of the price. But if you could catch it on the dip, if you see one guy listing it for around that price, it's a little bit more than the $400 or $500 budget. But for an autograph, PSA 10 at that price range, I think it's a good deal. But yeah, I hope that was helpful for you, Brian, and for anyone looking to invest in Vladdy. We're all bullish on him, and we're all expecting a great season from Vladdy too. So, all right. Thanks so much, guys, for the questions and comments. If you want to ask a question yourself, you can always DM us on Instagram at Cards to the Moon, or you can reach me at 5cardguys as well. And you never know, we might even have a new segment around your question or comment in future episodes. So we definitely do appreciate all the feedback that we've been getting so far. All right, let's move on then to our main weekly segment we call Hobby Headlines. All right, so the big news in the world of professional American football is that we on this podcast are allowed to discuss football because we weren't completely wrong about who's going to the Super Bowl. If you guys remember, we said last week we would never talk about football in this podcast if we were dead wrong again about our
close.
Super Bowl picks.
It was close, man. It was close.
The Chiefs let us down, but the Rams pulled through for us.
Barely.
At the very end. So let's talk football. And of course, really the big news is Tom Brady's retirement. First, was that a surprise to you guys?
It was.
Yeah,
actually.
it was.
It kind of caught me off guard
so.
for sure.
For a lot of us, yeah. I think a lot of us were thinking, oh, he'll come back for at least one more season, right?
Yeah, right.
No doubt he physically can. This guy's the GOAT,
for sure.
Right? Yeah.
For sure. And I think maybe it's because he does have a few business ventures that he can go to. I think that probably, and his family, of course. But
yeah, I think his kid plays hockey, so he's going to be more involved there as well.
So,
did you guys, sorry, this is off topic, but did you see the Ichiro comment?
No.
So it's pretty funny because in 2018, apparently Tom Brady texted Ichiro. He got his contact from A-Rod. And Ichiro was like, who the F is Tom Brady? He had no clue. And this is 2018. But there's memes going around. But I thought it was hysterical because Tom Brady actually wanted to reach out to Ichiro to ask him what his secret was to keep playing at that mid-40s age, right, in 2018. But that's kind of his response. But that's what I thought about when we were just talking about this. But anyways, go on, Clark.
That's funny. That's okay, so I wanted to actually talk about his rookie cards in light of his retirement news. But you could have guessed his best rookie cards are out of the price range for most collectors. So let me ask you instead, do you have a favorite Brady rookie card that you would buy if you had a lot of money, just for fun's sake?
Yeah, I would probably be in on the Bowman Chrome Refractor for sure.
Okay.
I think either that or the Contenders. Obviously, that's kind of like the grill. I think another one broke another record. The playoff one for 2.3. But I think either his Refractor or Contender Auto.
Yeah, top two for sure.
Yeah,
John, you got one?
Yeah, for me, it's easy. For me, I love the SB Authentic. I don't know why. There's something about maybe I'm subconsciously going back towards Upper Deck, but there's just something about that card. I just like the way it pops, like that white background, and then he's kind of wearing that Patriots sort of warm-up jersey, the red. I just like that card a lot. So if I had a boatload of cash and I'm going for a Grail Brady, SB Authentic PSA 10, probably goes for around 150K. That would be a Grail for me.
Nice. Yeah, not much more to add. I think the top three are the ones you just mentioned, guys. So the Contenders, the Bowman Chrome. I think the Chrome is the first, if not only, Chromium stock card, rookie card that Brady has. So that's nice. And the SB Authentic numbered to 1,250 is a pretty sweet card to have as well.
Johnny, I think I know a guy selling one if you want.
I wish.
Remortgage your house.
Even for a PSA 7, I probably have to give up my entire collection.
It was in the high rollers room.
Oh man, which grade is it? Oh, I saw that, the PSA 10.
Yeah, the PSA 10.
Yeah, he was asking. I think he was asking for 140 or something like that.
Yeah.
Oof.
Jeez.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Yeah, it's pretty much out of our price range. But what I did want to talk about, though, speaking of GOAT players and their rookie cards, we mentioned it before that in the hobby, many collectors try to attain these GOAT cards by essentially flipping and trading up. Like, that's the end goal for a lot of us collectors, right? But you have to make the right bets on lesser players and even time the sale right to keep moving up. So what might be more useful for a lot of our listeners and a lot of collectors is, do you have any strategies you use to try to trade up for these bigger cards? Any kind of advice on what you can do to hopefully attain one of these grail cards?
So yeah, what I like to do essentially is get more liquid cards and kind of I don't mind putting extra money into a trade too. So when I trade up to a card, I'll trade multiples plus a little bit of cash, right? And then once I get kind of like a bigger card, what I try to do is I try to kind of like lock that up and see where that goes, because they're tough to come by. I know the flip would be rewarding on some cards to, you know, cash out on a big card like that. And there are times when you do, when you feel it's right? But I don't think a lot of people do. It's not realistic for them to drop like a 5-figure of cash, you know, into one card, or 6 figures for that matter, right? So if I see all combinations of crypto, you know, trade for cash or trade for cards for slabs and then half, you know, PayPal or whatever it might be, right? So I think trading up, focusing on, you know, players that you think are going to be great, and those big cards that, you know, could potentially spike up in value where you're not really invested too much in, where you could get, you know, when the time's right, you maximize that value, or vice versa. If a player is on the downside, you know, that's when you want to trade for them, right? So when their price is low, you trade a value that's more higher to receive something of lower value, right? So
Yeah, and we always joke with you, Hyung, that you love volatility. So like, what kind of players do you like to target that has that volatile kind of potential?
It would have to be those you know, GOAT type players, or at least the big prospects that, you know, that are on the dip. Because you know, I remember we talked about Ja Morant earlier in the season. He was a guy that you could potentially see, okay, his prices could go bonkers because we've seen him before, right? So if you were to buy, you know, a big Ja in the off season, and now his card has, you know, tripled in value, let's just say the one you have, and, you know, a Justin Herbert is in the mix now that he's out of the, you know, playoff contention or Super Bowl, and his values kind of go down a bit where Ja Morant is high, right? This is a perfect opportunity to kind of, you know, look and time that market where you're maximizing your value on a particular card, right? And maybe buying into a card that's a little cheaper at the time, right? And then you could throw in some cash where, you know what, maybe that Ja Morant was $200 that you spend, and you spend another $300, and then you get like kind of like a $2,000 card for that $500 mark, or whatever it may be, or the combination, right? So yeah, just being creative with stuff like that.
Yeah, good advice.
Yeah. The liquidity, being liquid is probably the key. I think everybody should, number one, realize most people right now, trading up is a big thing. So most people are looking to trade up. So even if somebody's hanging on to a Grail Brady card that's $10,000, most likely they're wanting to use that $10,000 card with another $10,000 card to get a $20,000 card. That's what most people's strategies are. So number one, you have to understand that there's a small population that usually is willing to trade downwards. And if you do happen to find somebody that's willing to trade downwards, you also have to have, you know, your best bet is like under 5 cards to trade up. Like, you're not going to want 35 Soto PSA 10s trading upwards. Like, that's not going to happen, right? So everyone is going to have to grind a little bit and take some of your little $200 cards, $300 cards, turn that into something liquid in the $1,000 mark, like, you know, like a Trae Young Silver Prizm PSA 10, trade up to that mark. Now this is something that's around 1,000, that's liquid. Get another one of those, get another, you know, get two more, and then use those to get a Luka Silver at $3,000, and then somehow work your magic again and start to build that way. And I think once you get into $3,000 to $4,000 cards, I think then you can have a conversation with somebody that's hanging on to a $10,000 card that just happens to be wanting to look for some cash and you've got the right liquid cards for him, and then boom, a deal could happen, right? So I think the word liquid in terms of the trade world, whether you're going up or down, is the big word of the day, right? So
yeah, for sure. And when we think of liquid cards, I think it goes without saying you have to do your research, see what cards are in fact liquid, like what are people buying,
right.
And card ladders, we're not being paid by Card Ladder either, but it's a great tool to use to see what sales are. And even going to sports card shows, like you just kind of get a good gauge of what's selling and what's not.
Right.
So and sometimes you learn the hard way too. Like you might think a PSA 9 of a certain card would do well, but if the market starts to tank a little bit, then there's all of a sudden no market for PSA 9s because PSA 10s are more attainable. So usually you try to get the best grade at your price range, whatever you can afford. If it means to spend a little bit more on a PSA 10 or BGS 9.5, that's always good advice too, because those are usually more liquid than the lesser graded cards, right? But yeah, no, you just got to do your research. I think what I will add is, maybe diversify a little. Like I like the idea of going after volatile price cards where you could see a spike, but you never know, right? Like, some might just not see that spike for whatever reason, injury, like there's so many different reasons athletes can get into trouble, and we've seen it before with a number of players. So I would diversify a little bit, maybe have I like to have 3 or 4 players I like to target that I think are low priced or like a good deal, and you're just hoping for one to really spike, and then you could cover the cost of the other ones you're investing in, even if another one of those cards goes to zero, right? And in terms of more practical advice, like I like to target players that are, I mentioned this in previous episodes where, they have all the potential in the world, but for whatever reason, they haven't put it together yet. Maybe an injury, like Shohei Ohtani 2 seasons ago. He got injured. He has the potential. He has the pedigree. And, the Topps Chrome auto that I got was $500. Like it was way too cheap in my opinion. Right. And this year, like Lewis Robert, we're all high on Lewis. He's coming off an injured season, so he didn't play the full season. But what if he puts it all together? And we talked to Scotty last week, Scotty Baldwin of Scotty B Cards, saying like his WAR, if you stretch it out for the season, is 7.0, which is amazing. So if he could put a full season like that, and where his card prices are at now in the off season, I could easily envision that doubling as well, and then you could use that cash to trade up for a bigger card as well. So yeah, just kind of doing your research on what's liquid and also doing your research on players themselves. Right. Like why is this card not worth as much as it should be? Right. And how much confidence do I have in this player to reach his peak potential for this season or next season?
Right.
So yeah, and it goes without saying too, just have fun with it. Like it's always fun rooting for a player with where you're like, oh, this guy's gonna be awesome, and then you see that happen, you see that play out, and then it's amazing to be able to all of a sudden you have a $2,000 card that you bought for $200, and then just building your collection that way.
And then you go buy a box and rip because you think you're up.
The ultimate gamble.
You just got to throw that in there because I know a lot of listeners will be like, absolutely.
With that profit, enter a few razzes.
Yeah, enter a few razzes. You just never know, right?
And then you start all over.
Exactly. Repeat.
Rinse and repeat.
All right.
Okay, so yeah, it's one last thing I'll mention is to be patient. Like if you want a 10,000 or a 5-figure or 6-figure card, like that takes time, right? To build up, to build up. Like you can't expect like, oh, I invested $1,000 and all of a sudden it's worth 100,000. No, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest misconception is that, right? It's quick money. It's like a lot of variables can happen throughout the year. It's kind of an emotional roller coaster if you think about it. But if you watch sports, it's great, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah. And the people that do make those huge profits are taking huge risks as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
High risk, high reward, right? So,
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of GOAT type players, before we head to the next section, Serena Williams, her SI Sports Illustrated for Kids rookie card just broke the record for most expensive women's sports cards sold ever, selling at $117,000. It's crazy.
That's awesome news, though.
Great news.
Yeah, love it.
I say insane, not that it's because it's Serena Williams. I say insane because I don't know how much, those SI for kids cards?
Yeah.
Like, I don't get the hype as much as other people do. I get it. It's usually an older card versus like their main tops or whatever main release. But I know that within the card market, you can't actually sell like a physical card. If you deem it as a card, you have to get it licensed. So Sports Illustrated, they couldn't get it licensed, so they print it as a page, a part of their magazine, and it's just it's basically a cutout, like it's a piece of cardboard. You cut out. It's not officially a card. So to see something that's not officially a card and it's meant for like a kids magazine, that becomes like the best of the best, like Serena's, and then you got the Tiger Woods SI. Man, there's a part of me that's like, I understand it, and I don't get it at the same time. It's so wild to me that that's like their main rookie card or whatever. But anyways,
I just think that those, though, like, think how early they got them. That's why, because it's like they're predicting that these guys were GOATs when I think Tiger Woods, it was 1996 his card, right? And his rookie card 5 years later, in 2001, right? So for me, it's like that's a huge collector's item for Tiger Woods, like a Sports Illustrated for kids, right? So I get it, John. Like it comes from a magazine, and some people even have like the full magazines, which is cool, right? And that's why people even look on the Tiger Woods cards that the perforated is perfectly. You could see the teeth of the perforation, and if you don't see it, then that means it's trimmed. And there was a lot of stories of trimmed cards on that, particular 96 Tiger Woods Sports Illustrated. But yeah, that Serena Williams, history just repeats itself. Like I said, it's like the SI for kids is a strong brand in the community of cards, believe it or not. And I'm not surprised actually, with that sale, because there's been multiple Serena Williams sales in the five figures of her Net Pro, her glossy, like all those cards that are closing in record sales this past year in 2021. So it was just a matter of time before a PSA 10, a very rare card of like Serena, like a Sports Illustrated, goes for what it went, right? So I think it's great for the hobby, and I think there's a lot of room to grow for cards. Even that particular card, I see a Serena Williams PSA 9, the Sports Illustrated, selling for $1,000, right? And that's pot 43. So if a PSA 10 sells for 117,000, which is pot 3. Right, yeah, it's from the variance of $1,000 to $117,000. What is the true value of the PSA 9? And to me, if somebody's overpaying, if you want to call it overpaying for a PSA 10 at $117K, or maybe they're underpaying, there has to be somewhere in between. And like I said, when you're almost I guess 100 times less on a PSA 9, I just think that's a little weird, right? I think there's extreme value in those cards, like those PSA 9s.
Yeah. No, I agree with all your points. Amazing to see that kind of sale. And yeah, the question I had with the SI for kids, I understand that it might not be a card technically, like you were mentioning, John, but it's definitely a collectible at this point. So there's the value in that, right? But but yeah, I heard the same thing about the edges. Like you can't cut, it comes from a sheet where you can cut it with the hand, like it's perforated edges. But if you cut it with scissors, it's like they won't grade it, or it's not right. Like, do you know what I mean?
I guess
like,
if you see like the perforations are all flat because somebody used a pair of scissors going across.
Right. And that was the big deal with Tiger Woods' card, right? Is a lot of like that. I actually had to cancel a sale. I regret it now because it was a PSA 9 SI for kids, Tiger Woods. But this is when it was like I'd say $1,500. I don't know what they are now. I assume it's way more expensive than $1,500 for a PSA 9. But that was the question. And somebody messaged me and said, "Hey, you just got that Tiger. That's a known like trimmed card." That's what he told me, right? So that's when I got really kind of turned off with Sports Illustrated cards because it didn't have the perforated. It was a clean cut kind of, and I guess PSA did grade it. It graded a 9, and it didn't have the perforated. But then a BGS 9.5 at the time, it would sell for like $6,000-$7,000, and it would have like the perfect, the perforated edges that everybody's looking for, right? So,
Right.
Yeah, whenever I think about those cards, like if you had a sheet and you had to like cut it out by hand, like how nervous would you be to do that?
Man. Well, back then when you're a kid, you're probably like, whatever, just rip it. It's clean rip.
You probably do a better job as a kid.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And now you're like just sweaty palms. Yeah, you know what I want to ask you, but we'll save it for another episode. Whether the bigger question for me is like, are investing in women's players an underrated play? I think they are.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll get into that more so, especially with the Olympics coming up. Like I think I read somewhere about this before, but that for network TV, like the higher ratings are for women's sports in the Olympics. So it depends on the sports itself, but there's a lot of potential to invest in women players where you could see a good increase in the value of these cards moving forward. So
absolutely,
another thing to look out for. All right, with that, then let's move on to our final segment of this show. It's called Pick One. And as we normally do, we alternate between the regular edition of Pick One and the Hot Takes edition. And this week it is the regular edition, which is just pitting two cards together, and we debate on which one we would rather invest in. All right, so Hyung, you want to lead off?
I'll lead us off as usual. I'm going with some silvers and holos of Ja Morant. All right, okay. So we're going with the Prizm Silver Ja Morant PSA 10 at $1,800. It's around what the comps are, his silver prisms. And now that we're going into NBA playoff season soon, we're wondering what will happen with prices, especially if Ja takes Memphis to kind of like deep into the playoffs, I guess, and he shows his talent, which I think he has been, by the way. He's been sending a message really clear, I think. Especially earlier this year when he made that statement with like Luka and Trey, and he wants to be, named and all that. But anyways, I'm putting that up against the Optic Holo PSA 10. So the I guess the silver version of the Optic image, which goes for about half that price. So sales were in around seven to 800. But there's not a lot out for sale, right? So there's only a couple on bids. So I'm assuming prices will gradually increase as basketball progresses in the next month or so. But what are your opinions? You take the cheaper holo at $800 half. Is that the better investment, or are you going with the staple Prizm Silver that everybody wants?
So you guys know me. I would pick Optic Holo, but for this specific question, I'm going to go silver. Yes, I'm going to go silver. I am. And I don't remember if I mentioned it on this pod. Maybe we mentioned it offline. But it was a while ago I heard this, and I'm thinking it was Jeff Wilson in one of his very old videos. It might have been somebody else mentioning how they were having dinner after like a big card show or something, and they're sitting with some big wigs, possibly from Panini. I don't know the inside scoop, but they had mentioned that he had overheard a conversation of some of those big wigs talking about how they purposely made silver in 2019 a lot more less printed than previous years versus the base. So in terms of like ratio of how many were printed, and this was like early on. I think this was when Prizm first came out. So if it was Jeff Wilson, he kind of posed the questions. Let's see what happens now when these grades start coming back in like 6 to 12 months from now. Let's see what happens. Now, if you look at the pop reports of, say, base Luka and silver Luka PSA 10s, it's like whatever 17,000 base, 3,000 silver for Luka. And then if you look at Ja Morant, the base is obviously going really high, and you'll notice the silver in comparison ratio wise, it is actually lower. So maybe there was some truth to that, sort of like opening the ear to the insiders. So that really intrigues me about the silver, particularly just for the 2019 year. I'm not talking about any other year. So for Ja's year, and I like this, I like the Prizm design in that particular year. So personally, on a design level, I like it just as much as Optic, but then I'm very intrigued of that print run. I think it could hold pretty low. It's probably what do you guys know what it's at right now?
Yeah, I'm just looking up. Yeah, on Pop Report for the silver PSA 10,
2000.
It's at 1264.
Yeah, 1264.
That's like half of Luka's, right?
But then the base is almost catching up to Luka, right?
Almost 20,000.
19,000
something.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go. So you look at the ratio is already a lot less than the Luka. So I think that really intrigues me. So even though the price is higher on the silver, it is sort of what in Baseball World Flagship, it's the main iconic card. And if it really was printed less than normal, man, I'm all over that card. That's the one.
Nice.
Okay.
What about you, Clark?
Yeah, John convinced me to go Prizm, so it's like the question I asked last week or the couple weeks ago about Luka silver Prizm PSA 10 versus Optic Holo.
Oh yeah, right.
So essentially, we're swapping players, and I think I went with silver, but and I think that was harder for me to answer, the Luka comparison. But with Ja Morant, I'm going with silver for pretty much the same reasons as why I went with Luka. I think it's more liquid. Although, I think everything you just mentioned, John, it's playing out. Like the number of PSA 10 silvers is a lot less than Luka's PSA 10 silver. And if you look at PSA 9, maybe it's like hard grading, but PSA 9 is about 2,200 of the silver. So if you add them all up, low gem rate. I like that. That the PSA 10 is harder to get, and I'm also looking at the peak values. Like one of them sold for about 5,000 at its peak. So the potential is there, right? Like
for sure.
It's almost 2.5x versus the Optic Holo, which I'm looking at the stats. It's sold for almost 2,000, so it's at 800. So not as much of a gain. Still a good increase if it goes back up to those levels. But I think with the higher potential of the silver Prizm and the lower pop count in general of silver Prizm PSA 10s, I'm investing in Ja Morant at that price.
Nice. I agree with you guys, and I think it's going to be a sweep. Although I think like the Optic Holo, the reason why I brought it up is if it's in your budget, I still think both are great.
Love it.
Great
prices.
Sure.
So it's like it's one of those things where both are a great buy in my opinion. And if it fits your budget, definitely I would go Prizm as well, based on what both of you guys said. And I kind of wanted to put that out there too, because I think it's a good perspective that you guys brought, and that's exactly why I did it, is because I knew the Optic was cheaper, but I thought the Prizm Silver of Ja Morant is a great buy. It's a great card. And 2019 Prizm is probably one of my favorite designs that they've released in the past, 5-6 years, or even all of Prizm, maybe, and I know that's a bold statement, but I think the silver Prizm, like I said, I've monitored that card. I've even seen Luka's Prizm go up to 8K, which is insane. But I just think that's going to be an iconic card, and I'm even more bullish on it because what John said about the print run being at 1,200, because I think Zion's silvers are over 2,000 now. I would imagine so. So seeing that on Ja, I think it's very comforting.
Yeah, agree. But
Sweet.
like you mentioned. Having said that, practically, like in real life, I'd probably go for the Optic Holo because that's more within our budget.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, that's
so
US. What's USD at? That's our question.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, John.
So in honor of Brady's retirement, I'm going to put arguably the two largest GOATs in sports history against each other. So 2000 Brady Bowman Chrome Refractor BGS 95 versus the 86 Fleer Jordan PSA 10. If you could have one shot at one of these all-time grail cards, both selling for in and around the 300,000 mark. I think the Brady's a little bit more right now, for obvious reasons. But yeah, if you could have a shot at one of these, which one are you picking?
I'll go first. I'll go for Brady. And like, I was listening to, it might be Sports Card Nonsense, but another sports card podcast where they ask Golden or another auction house, like, they keep getting Fleer 1986 Jordans. Like,
right.
It's a little bit scary, the supply that's actually out there that hasn't come in yet to be graded. And, like, it just seems like, yeah, it's an iconic card, no doubt, right? And MJ is, I think, the greatest athlete of all time over Brady, in my opinion. But I'm going for the card in this case. And they're both GOATs, so, but I'm going for the card. And the Bowman Chrome Refractor, like, if you ever see it in person, it looks really nice. Like, the shine that comes off of it.
It's the early 2000s, like, refractors. They're different. They hit different.
Amazing, yeah. Wow, it's yeah, it's shiny. Yeah, I like that. I think, I don't know definitively, but I'm gonna wager that in terms of pop count, it's a lot less than the 1986 Fleer. So I'm going after the card itself, although I think MJ is a better player. But yeah, I think in terms of value over time, especially long term, I could see the Brady growing much higher, whereas MJ would plateau, if not decrease a little bit, due to the supply demand.
Right. Speaking of pop count, did you guys see? I think it was PSA had an IG post where they posted like their top 10 submitted cards, particular cards over the last in 2021, and the 86 Fleer was on that list.
Really?
The Jordan, like, yeah, it was on the. It was like, I think it was on the top 10 list. I could be wrong, but I remember being like shocked. I'm like, how? What? Like, how is the 86 Fleer on a list of most submitted cards to PSA? Like, that didn't make any sense to me, especially
Fleer's
modern
just
cards.
Been pumping them out in the last 2 years.
I don't know where people are getting these boxes or like.
Clark, you might have to edit that out. Does Fleer still exist?
I think they're bought out by one of the companies. So.
Yeah.
Huh.
Crazy.
Makes me nervous.
Yeah, no, yeah. So it makes me not want to say 86 Jordan. But yeah, the Brady Refractor I would have said, just because exactly what you said, Clark. It's the card more so than anything, and it's one of the parallels, the very, very rare parallels that any Brady card has. So for me, it's more of the scarcity at this point, right? It's like I'll probably be able to find a Jordan PSA 10, somewhere, but being able to find a gem mint, Brady Refractor, I think it's pretty insane. So I'm definitely going with the Brady Refractor. It's a sweep.
I know.
Is, I think.
You know what? I think, truth be told, if we were actually in a scenario to spend $300,000 and purchase one of these cards, the Brady, investment wise, would make all the sense in the world, because there's a lot of indicators in the future to possibly make this card spike a little bit. Hall of Fame announcements, yada, yada, yada. So I think even if Fleer Jordan is your ultimate goal, you can buy the Brady Chrome Refractor now, and then when it spikes, sell it and use the profits to get into the Jordan. So that would make the most sense. Maybe just to save my own 1v1. But, growing up in that junk wax era, growing up in the Jordan Kobe era, like, Jordan is my all-time, like, 86 Fleer, all-time card. Like, I would love to have that card in any garbage condition. Like that, anyone who collected in our age group, that was the card. Like, the card. If somebody had that, you were like, oh my gosh, like, such and such has, this guy has the Jordan rookie. Like, his dad got it from when he opened packs back in the day, or whatever, right? So I think that all of the nostalgia, everything involved, and I have one shot at one of these two cards, I want to say I want to pick the 86 Fleer based on my love for collecting and Jordan and everything. And, as much as that PSA report about the Jordans getting submitted is scary, when you look at the PSA 10 pop report, even though there were 25,086 Fleer submitted, I don't think that PSA 10 number moved barely at all, right? So that gives you some comfort that, okay, yeah, there might be a boatload of PSA 6s out now and a boatload of PSA 3s, but that PSA 10 number at around 300, you can rest assured that that number won't move too much in the next forever, the rest of our lifetime. So I think for an all-time collector card, like this is, if you're in a category in the high roller space, this is like a must-have. Like everybody is going to have, like, this is a must-have card in your collection. So I think 300 pop is not enough. I still think it's could go up just as much as the Brady Refractor. So I'm gonna pick the 86 Fleer Jordan. I'll be the one to do it.
No, those are good points though, for sure. That the PSA 10 is what makes it scarce.
Right.
But all right, good one. Okay, I'll round off the pick one segment, and I'm looking ahead towards the World Cup in November in Qatar. And I'm going to ask this because I kind of want to make a soccer play at some point. Or this early in the year is probably the time to make it if you're going to make it. So let's throw out Kylian Mbappe, one of the hot soccer stars playing right now for France. His World Cup Silver Prizm PSA 10, which is going last sold for about 3,600 and the pop count's 253, versus his Topps Chrome UEFA Refractor, the 2017, I believe, which is going for a little bit more, 4,100, and the pop count is 138, so a little bit less as well.
Man, I'm gonna go with the Topps Chrome Champions League, the 2017. I do like his 2018 World Cup, but it is a World Cup card, so I think over time the refractor of the Champions League card will be stronger, especially with half the pop count that the World Cup does have. So yeah, I'm gonna go Topps Chrome Refractor. I think that's gonna be a huge card moving forward.
Okay.
Same. I'm picking the Topps Chrome UEFA Refractor. It's 2017 versus 2018. When it comes down to it, most collectors are gonna want the earlier version, no matter how nice the following versions are. I don't know if there's any truth to this. This is just completely my own observation when I was getting back into sports cards. As you all know, like at the beginning of the pandemic, soccer wasn't as poppin' as it is now. And I remember looking at cards, and I think, when people started looking back at soccer and they started to investigate, it was easy to go think about Prizm. Basketball was king. Everyone was looking at Prizm. I'll admit it. The first thing I tried to type in was soccer Prizm, and boom,
Great.
The World Cup came out, right? So I think that World Cup set in 2018 had a ton of exposure when soccer was getting on the map. And as soccer really did get on the map, people started to really do their research and realize, oh, wait, guys like Mbappe have a card in 2017, Topps Chrome, and then they have a rookie card in whatever his actual rookie card is with that split with the other guy. That's like 2014 Panini or whatever that is.
Right.
I'm totally butchering it, but I think as people started to really do their research, they found out, oh, it's not World Cup Prizm is the end all be all. There's all these other cards that exist. So just my observation, no idea if there's any truth to that, but I feel like the World Cup Prizm in the early years really had a big shine. Like everybody was looking at that set. That was like the king set to go to. And
that 2018 World Cup set is monstrous, though. You're right. Like that 2018 World Cup is absolutely monstrous.
Right. Low print run, all of that jazz.
Low print run, super expensive for a box now.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
We're talking like 5 Gs for a box, maybe probably more for a hobby box in 2018 World Cup, right? So,
yeah. So, I mean, it's still big, but I think bottom line, end of the day, the UEFA Refractor, lower pop, it's slightly more in terms of money to spend. But I think it's worth it, man. People are going to look at the they're going to prefer 2017 over 2018. I know I would as a collector. So yeah, UEFA Refractor for me.
Okay. Yeah, this was a hard one. I keep going back and forth, but I like all your points. I'm actually going to go with the World Cup because I think it largely it also depends on when you want to flip it, right? Like if you want to flip it this year, I think if you have the World Cup card, it might be easier to flip for a good price.
Good point.
Yeah, for later this year, especially if France does well. He's in his country uniform rather than the club uniform, and who knows where Mbappe is going to play in the future. There's always questions about that too. So yeah, I think, and like you mentioned, Hyung too, like that World Cup 2018 is an iconic set. So like I think if people have other players that they like of that World Cup set, and they might not be able to collect the full set, but they might want to target other players from that same set. So there might be demand that way as well. And I'm just looking at card ladder as well. Like, who knows if we'll go to the peak, but the peak of the Topps Chrome UEFA Refractor was about just over 10,000. And I don't know if it's what you said about, Panini getting the shine early on, but the highest sale of that card, the World Cup Silver, was 12,000. So definitely higher. But yeah, both amazing cards. I think I would, whatever the better deal is at the time, I would probably go for it. But in terms of flipping, I think there's more opportunity this year, at least, for the World Cup Silver Prizm. All right. Thanks to everyone listening to this episode and this podcast of Cards to the Moon. Like we said at the top of the show, if you guys have any questions or anything that you want us to address in future episodes, please DM us, message us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we would appreciate if you do so. You get a notification of every new episode that comes out on Tuesdays. That's all for this week. We'll see you guys then next week. Hey, thanks for listening to Cards to the Moon. We'd really appreciate you subscribing to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also connect with each of us on Instagram at 5cardguys, or you can follow Hyung at Integrity Sports Cards, or John at TradeU at Recess. You can also check us out at 5cardguys.com. Thanks again, and hope to connect soon.